the position I speak from both as a prior military officer, but not just prior military, but like I was in the drug war. Like this plant was one of the uh, targets of our operations. And for me, having that background, but being involved in the science of climate change, how do we steer society toward being more planet positive in our systems? Not talking about this plant and its potential benefits and uses. I think it's actively harmful and it's not utilizing a tool that's potentially there for us.
Welcome to Higher Spirits, a podcast of elevated cannabis conversations with me, your host, Lexi Kafka. Here we explore the powerful intersections of cannabis, spirituality, and mindfulness to better understand how to cultivate a conscious relationship with this plant. We journey with thought leaders and experts who bring a unique perspective on how cannabis connects us deeper to ourselves, our history, and the planet. Hello, plant fam. Welcome back to another episode of Higher Spirits. And today's episode feels especially aligned with the energy of the moment because we recorded it on Earth Day last week, just after 420, which is every plant lover's favorite holiday. And this time of year always feels so magical for me because it's a chance to honor both the plant and the planet within a few days of each other. So it felt perfect to mark it by talking about sustainability in cannabis with my guest, Peter Deneen. So Peter is a climate journalist, an environmental advocate, and someone I am lucky enough to call a friend. So a few years ago, we created an event called 420 ppm, which brought together growers, activists, and plant lovers to explore how cannabis could be a force for climate healing. We'll get into more about 420 ppm here and in the episode, but I want to just share, Peter has a fascinating journey. He gets into it a little bit in the episode, but he started off as a narcotics officer in the Coast Guard. Yes, fighting the war on drugs. So it's really interesting that he now is so public about his cannabis support. After he left the military service, he became a climate journalist and climate writer, and he came out of the cannabis closet, which, like I said, is a big deal for a previous military officer, by publishing a piece about ancient high-potency cannabis found in glacial burial sites in Western China. Sounds nerdy. It is nerdy, but it's a super interesting read. I'll link it in the show notes, but high-level takeaway is humans have had a very long sacred relationship with this plant. Probably not news to anyone listening to this podcast. Let's get back into what 420 ppm was. So back in 2022, Peter called me and was like, hey, something crazy is about to happen. The Earth's atmospheric carbon is about to hit 420 parts per million in April of 2022. So this is a very poetic moment in terms of timing, but also a very sobering milestone because, for reference, we have hovered around 280 parts per million for most of human history until the Industrial Revolution. Since then, it's just been going up and up and up. So this moment inspired us to bring together both of our communities to honor cannabis, the earth, and how we can actually use this plant to lower carbon emissions and create a more conscious, earth-friendly community. So for 420 ppm, we held the event at Dennis Hopper's old house in Venice in Los Angeles, and we brought down some of these farmers from the Emerald Triangle to introduce to the Los Angeles community, and it was so impactful. We hosted over 160 people, and it resonated pretty far and wide, not only with the guests who still to this day, I have people coming up to me being like, I consume and purchase cannabis differently because of that event. But we also got a lot of organic press coverage. It was pretty amazing. Even NPR picked it up, which was so exciting. Beyond that, though, it also had a deep impact on my personal relationship with cannabis. It's how I met Tina Gordon of Moon Made Farms, a dear friend and mentor, also the first guest that I had on this podcast in episode 1. And I got connected to the wider sun-grown community, which has become a core thread of this podcast and my work in general ever since. So to broaden horizons beyond this event that we did, we also just talk about the general connection between climate and cannabis and how growing cannabis regeneratively can actually help us sequester carbon from the atmosphere and restore and clean our soil, and how consuming cannabis can actually increase empathy and connection to the earth. So when used correctly, this is a really powerful tool to combat climate change. There's even a study that shows that cannabis users are more likely to engage in pro-environmental behaviors, which feels kind of obvious, right? Think of the hippie era. But sometimes it takes a while for science to catch up to what many of us feel intuitively, you know? So Peter also shares a powerful reflection on what it means to feminize consciousness from a male perspective. And for him, it's about developing sensitivity and empathy and living in service of life, not trying to control and dominate it, right? It's that dominating energy that we're trying to balance out. So it's that softening that is so core to this podcast, and that is what this plant has taught both of us and what we need to cultivate more of right now as a community and as a global society. So that's what we're exploring today. Let's get into it and let's get higher. Hello. Welcome to Higher Spirits, Peter Deneen. I'm very, very happy to finally get you here. And happy Earth Day. We're here on April 22nd, Earth Day. And this is so perfect because we're here to talk about cannabis and the climate. And a brief little intro. Peter Deneen is a close friend. We've thrown a beautiful event together called 420 ppm. And he is a incredibly intelligent, dedicated, and passionate climate journalist. So we're here to bring your climate knowledge to the space and talk about the world which we uncovered together of regenerative sun-grown cannabis and its connection to the climate, and where we are now, fast forward a few years since we've done that event, and how this plant can help us hopefully create a more sustainable future. So Peter Deneen, welcome.
Thank you, Lexi. It's good to be here. It's been really cool to follow your journey since we met in 2020, and maybe especially since we hosted that 420 ppm event, and watching where your career has gone. And yeah, I've enjoyed following your latest launches, your Substack, and this podcast, and everything that you have done and continue to do with a lot of the people that we met along that journey together. So yeah, happy 55th Earth Day, and I'm stoked to be here. Thanks for having me.
55th Earth Day. We've been honoring the Earth for 55 years.
Yep, just 55 years. Yeah, the first the first Earth Day was in 1970. And so it's 2025. So this is the 55th Earth Day. And that first Earth Day actually was in large part a response to the oil spill off the Santa Barbara coast, where I know you have family ties and that you've spent a lot of time in that zone. So yeah, very, very full circle.
It's from Ojai, California.
Yeah, I am here in Ojai, White Sage territory, land of the Chumash. This is the land that I grew up in, and the land that I moved back to a few years ago after going back east for school, and then a career as a military officer, as an officer in the Coast Guard. And yeah, it's great to be home. It's what a place to come, what a place I've grown up in, what a place to come back to, especially with fresh eyes and new intentions.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. And I remember when we met, when you were coming back to, okay, so we'll get to our meeting story. This might be a good segue, but I remember when we met, I started talking to you about cannabis and some of the work I was doing in the social justice space. And you were like, I love weed, but I wasn't able to like really consume it without a lot of guilt, or I don't even know if you were able to at all because you were in the military for all those years. I remember that was like one of the first conversations we had when we met on, should we say it? Okay, so when we met on
We have
Hinge,
to,
Peter
yeah.
and I,
2020.
and yeah, and one of those, well, we were getting to know each other in that way, which has transitioned into friendship. You were telling me that all those years in the military had a deep impact on your view of this plant, actually.
Yeah, well, I grew up with, cannabis was part of definitely the culture of growing up here. So the plant was part of my life as as an early teenager. And then obviously when I went into the Coast Guard, I went to the academy for college, and then um, yeah, you can't smoke weed in the military even now, as it's legal. You can't. And so yeah, the plant was not part of my life for a good number of years. In fact, I was my main specialty in the Coast Guard was high seas, narcotics, interdiction. So while that was less about marijuana, it was more focused on cocaine. However, a lot of our operations off the like in the coastal California corridor was generally bulk cannabis seizures at sea or on beaches of California, and that was mostly in like the pre 2016, like the pre legal time in California. I'm not sure what trafficking trends are nowadays. I imagine they've fallen off for that product, but anyhow, yeah. When I left the military and went back to school and studied climate science, and came back to California just at the start of the pandemic. And when I met you, um, it was really impactful for me in many ways. But one of the things you did for me was really putting language to a lot of um, things that I felt and intuited and understood about that plant that I had been so fond of from a young age, and had recently been reintroduced back into my life once I left the military. And I remember you showed me your deck in the backyard of the house in Santa Barbara, and it was your new rituals deck, and it was described, and that was a revelatory moment for me. It really was. It was, and I didn't forget that when about a year later, um, the coincidence that I had kind of started tracking when I was in grad school, which was the increasing concentration of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere. Um, as anyone who smokes weed knows, the numeral 420 is sacred, both as a date and a number and a time of the day. And so I was kind of watching the global atmospheric carbon trends creeping up and increasing in acceleration toward 420. And I kind of saw, I was like, wow, it looks like maybe in the spring of 2022, Earth's average will reach 420 parts per million, and it will be on or about like April 20th. And so, yeah, the kernel in my mind about 420 ppm was set when I met you, and you shared new rituals with me. And I knew that if I was going to take this idea and do something about it, that you were going to be the person to partner up with to make it happen.
I mean, I was so you okay, so this is yeah, Peter calls me and he is like, I just smoked this I just you were like, I just smoked a little something and I realized something is about to happen. And it was in like December of 2021. And you're like, April of next year, our atmospheric carbon is going to hit 420 parts per million for the first time in human history. And I was like, that's amazing. What does 420 parts per million mean? Um, so let's break, what does that mean? In terms of like, why is it important? What is the original level that we were usually hovering around? Like, why was this number so important to bring attention to?
Yeah. So carbon is sort of a much, I would say, maligned element at this point. We hear about carbon, there's all this negative connotation. Carbon is in everything, right? It is life. It is what is what we are made of, is what the plants are made of. But also we have carbon in the form of carbon dioxide as a molecule in our atmosphere. And for most of human evolution, right, the past, say, 3.5 million years or so, planet Earth's carbon, it has always fluctuated over Earth's history. There's been drastically different amounts of atmospheric carbon. But for most of our evolution, we were somewhere around 280 parts per million. That's 280 parts per million of atmospheric carbon is where we were at before the Industrial Revolution began. Say like
280.
280, yeah. So that's
Okay.
so like 1895 global atmospheric carbon is about 280 parts per million.
Okay.
And that in parts per million is just that is how many carbon dioxide molecules there are in the air per cubic square unit, right? And
Gotcha.
so the way that we measure that, there's an observatory on Mauna Loa, which is the volcano out in Hawaii, and they measure at that point because it's one of the most like neutral places on the planet where it's just there's no other land or polluting sources for within thousands of miles. And so from the top of this 11,000-foot volcano, they send up a little balloon every day. They capture a sample of the Earth's atmosphere. They measure it. They see how much methane. They see how much carbon dioxide. They see how much nitrogen. They they can do a little breakdown, and that gets plotted on a chart. And every day they're a little bit different, but within a range. Today, for example, the Mauna Loa reading was just over 428 parts per million of atmospheric carbon. Atmospheric carbon is important because it has a very long residence time in our atmosphere, right? So the warming that we're feeling from atmospheric carbon today was produced decades ago. It has a very long staying time in our atmosphere, right? So it accumulates. And the shape of carbon dioxide as a molecule, it's this like triangular shape, right? There's a carbon up here in the middle and there's two oxygens next to it. And when sunlight comes in from the sun, it comes in as shortwave radiation. And so it's able to pass through those molecules no problem. But Earth also re-radiates in the form of long wave radiation back out into space. That molecule, carbon dioxide molecule, is just the right shape that when those long wave radiation rays hit them, they don't pass through. It causes them to move and to dance. And so as these carbon molecules are kind of dancing and moving throughout the atmosphere, it's the movement from those molecules that generates warmth, and that's what we perceive as warming. And so the Earth at this point, as a global average, right, has increased. We're somewhere around 1.5 degrees Celsius from that pre-industrial temperatures, and that warming happens unevenly, right, because different parts of the planet all warm at different rates. The Arctic is warming much faster, for example, than like equatorial planet Earth. So when I left the military and started studying climate science at Columbia University, where I was living in New York, that's where I started really focusing on our relationship to land. Because our energy systems are based around, and have always been based around, the most economical and abundant form of energy, fossil fuels in general, right, since about that 1895 period, have been the planet's primary source of energy. And the waste products of producing that energy are accumulating in our atmosphere, and that is why the atmospheric carbon concentration is an important figure to monitor and to watch. And so as I was watching this figure rise toward 420 parts per million, I thought, whoa, what better way to call attention to the climate crisis than to try to galvanize and awaken the community of people who consume the cannabis plant, who generally have a higher degree of nature relatedness just as a cohort than the average demographic. And yet a lot of cannabis consumers are, for the most part, uneducated about the connection between their cannabis consumption and the impact that it has on the planet. And even just, I think, with a very small amount of education around how those choices can actually be positive and beneficial for the planet can go a really long way. And so that's where the 420 ppm event, I think, was really cool what we created, which was like really bringing the focus on this choice that consumers can make and educating around that. And so
Yeah, and I think we learned so much along the way as well, or I can say I learned so much along the way. Because you came to me with this realization of dates, and everyone knows that 420 is also around Earth Day, is around Bicycle Day. It's this kind of like cosmic celebratory time of the Earth and its elements.
yeah,
But I don't think we actually knew what we were going to uncover in this journey. And we started to reach out to people and be like, we're going to gather and we're going to create some type of event. And we were introduced to Sun+Earth. And I think that was the key that really unlocked it all. I mean, Chelsea Satula, shout out at Sesame Creek, one of the best dispensaries in California if you're ever out in the Central Coast area. But she introduced us to Sun+Earth. And Sun+Earth is a certification. I feel like I've talked about it on the podcast before, but maybe not. It's a certification for regenerative sun-grown biodynamic farms. They say it's similar to like the Demeter in Europe. So that to me, I was like, whoa, organic weed? Why haven't I thought about this? I buy all of my other produce organic.
right.
I go to the farmer's market. So when we discovered that certification, my mind was blown, and that opened us up to the actual farmers. And when the farmers, I mean, people like Stephen Smith from Onda, Tina Gordon from Moonmaid, Blair from Radical Farms, they started sharing information and statistics on how the chasm between well-grown cannabis and how helpful and supportive it can be if it's grown in this way, and indoor like unconsciously cultivated cannabis is we easily had an event that was headline worthy because the information was so new and so impactful. Um,
Yeah.
so
I remember calling Chelsea at Sesame Creek Collective, which is here in Ojai, because she was the only person really who I knew, right, who was in that industry. And as we were creating this event, it was like, who do we start with? Like, okay, obviously we'll just call like our local dispensary. And little did we know that she was about to hop on a call with the team, with David Bronner's team. And little did we know that they were about to launch this campaign. All right, David Bronner was pouring massive resources into a campaign called We Like Change that was aiming to shore up small family regenerative farms, cannabis farms in California. And then it was like they Bronner and his team they were looking for exactly what we were looking to create in that moment. And we had no idea that even this Sun+Earth certification existed, and that essentially in like educating people that did exist and that you do have a choice kind of became the crux of a 420 ppm, would you say?
absolutely. And we ended up with over 160 people. We got press coverage, completely organic from, I mean,
Yeah.
you were in charge of the press list, but I know, I mean, NPR was the big one. We flew,
NPR, High Times.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was it was a smashing success. It was so much work. We worked our butts off, but it was a smashing success. And I still hear from people um like that event changed the way that I view cannabis, and that event changed the way I personally really view cannabis. So thank you for that invitation.
Thank you for birthing that thing with me. That was crazy. We yeah, we with once we hooked up with Bronner, it was like um we were able to rent out the Hopper compound, right, in Venice, which also had this such a serendipity connected to that, it being at that venue. Um, and then once we were building it, it was like, oh, someone is creating a documentary film about regenerative cannabis, and they're looking for a place to premiere it. It was like, boom, all right, we'll premiere a film. And then we created two. It was, I think you came up with the branding that was like panel by day, party by night. So like in the daytime on 420, right? We had cannabis yoga, and we had a few things, but the main events of the daytime part were these two panels that were comprised of like, man, we had regenerative farmers, we had policymakers, we had climate science folks, we had Mary Carey on, climate cannabis journalist, moderating one of the panels. I moderated a panel. We did the kind of like, one was like a kind of like rearward looking telescope, a kind of hindsight of how we got to where we are today with cannabis, because like the legalization rollout of cannabis in California was pretty disastrous. It is pretty disastrous, and loopholes that were left open really caused catastrophic impacts to these small scale family farms. No real like restorative justice occurred for people who are incarcerated due to cannabis offenses. So the legal route in California was um, fumbled pretty badly, and so we had that kind of like rearward looking focus, and then it was the second panel was kind of like forward looking, like where do we go from here? Where can we go from here? And we had Tina Gordon on that panel. We had it was a really inspiring, uplifting conversation about like what it all could look like, if we if
Yeah, if we did this right.
yeah
Um, and like, what does that mean? And I think it means honoring the way that this plant is grown naturally and creating policy that allows us to do so, which means you can't grow cannabis in Michigan like you can grow cannabis in California. In the same ways you can't grow grapes in Michigan or in New York, in the same way that you can grow them in California, but we can't cross state lines with the crop right now. So you're forced to grow inside. When you grow inside, it's a highly, 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 highly energy intensive production. And
yeah
that's really what the concern I think is, and we're just seeing. That's when I started to learn that only 1% of dispensary shelves are sun-grown cannabis in California. Everything else is indoor grown.
yeah if we are going to act like there is an emergency with our energy, the byproduct of our energy consumption, right? Namely, the increasing atmospheric carbon concentration, which is resulting in global warming. Um, you would think that we'd be doing everything possible to try and reduce that energy need. And so, in a place like California, where for a lot of the state, it's not really appropriate. It's not really climate appropriate to be growing indoors. There's no need for it. And so the I can't remember what the statistics are for the amount of energy consumption just in California alone on growing indoor as a share of the state's total. Do you have that figure?
Yeah, I had them. I was ready.
You're
I
ready.
have them pulled up on my phone. Cannabis production in Colorado, I have emits 44 times more carbon than coal mining. The carbon footprint from growing 1 pound of cannabis indoor can exceed that of a round trip flight from San Francisco to Tokyo. Like,
Yeah,
1 pound of weed is not a lot.
yeah. There's, in my opinion, no real need to grow cannabis that way. Just if you want to look at it just from like a straight up like stone cold um, energy consumption rationale. Then we can talk about the actual like the other reasons why, aside from the carbon footprint of growing, there's there's a whole spectrum of reasons why it's I would say a better choice to consume sun grown, outdoor grown
Yeah,
cannabis.
and we can talk about those. Let's talk about those too.
Yeah, I mean, um, what's cool about the Sun+Earth certification is that, sort of in the same way that something is certified USDA organic, I would say this is like the highest level standard, actually, of any real product that I've heard of in terms of what is required to be Sun+Earth certified. Because it's not just like your product is organic. It's obviously that just comes inherently with the process. To grow regeneratively, right? It means all organic inputs, sunshine grown, no synthetic fertilizers, no pesticides, no herbicides. There's a social component uh, about fair wages for employees. There's a community give back component. There's all these dimensions to the Sun+Earth certification that make it brings an integrity to the process. And then the product itself, right? Like the actual flower that gets grown through this process is, whether you're looking at it from like a terpene profile of a flower to the way it makes you feel, the kind of experience that you get to have that you can have with it is so different from a product that is grown under lights in a closed room with fans with synthetic fertilizers. It is a far different experience to consume that plant than it is one that's grown
Yeah.
out
In
here in
your
the
alma
sun.
mater, Columbia, did a study on this actually, and they did find that there's consistently a more robust terpene and cannabinoid profile in sun-grown cannabis, meaning that when it's grown in the sun, there's more other great terpenes and cannabinoids which help the high. It's the entourage effect. Um, so, and I have, if anyone's interested in this, go listen to episode 1. Tina talks all about this. Um, but something I would be curious to ask you about, because it comes back to the land and it comes back to the climate. Well, it all comes back to the climate, but it comes back to the land, is this fact that when used properly, like we can really utilize the cannabis plant as a regenerative crop because it helps clean the soil. Because I believe it's a bioaccumulator, I think is the word, the term. So I would love it if you could explain, like, what are these crops used for? Why are they so important? Why were they using them back in George Washington days? Like, this crop, I think, has been used in regenerative agriculture for quite a long time for this reason.
Yeah. Um, my first, actually, my I had a job when I was in grad school at Columbia. I was a staff writer for one of my professor's websites. It was called glacierhub.org. And I became his senior editor and stayed on after graduating. And we would write stories about anything glacier related all around the world, or cryosphere related in general. So ice sheet, glaciers, communities impacted by them by climate change. And so one of the stories I did was, it came out of the Hindu Kush region, and there was a discovery made of um, there was a burial site that was discovered, and some of the artifacts from that burial site, I want to say, if my memory serves it correctly, in that instance were like 2,500 years old. I think there have been other instances discovered more recently of even older evidence of high THC levels, so high psychoactive cannabis buried with people. So anyhow, I wrote this story probably in 2019 about cannabis and cultures that lived in or near glaciers. And the key to living in or near glaciers was, as the glaciers would melt during the summertime, they would provide runoff and enabled for a very abundant habitat for cannabis to thrive in. Anyhow, the fact that people were buried with these different vessels that contained residue of cannabis plants with high psychoactive components in the plant, indicating that they were selectively bred for their psychoactive components. It really, for a guy who was a military officer involved in the drug war, for me to then be out of the military, be in school and writing this story, it really gave me a different framing and perspective on that plant in particular, because it's been part of human culture for so long, right? For as far as we can tell, for several millennia, it's been part of human culture. And if it was such a valued plant to these cultures for all the different reasons. I mean, cannabis is grown as a fiber, right? Because the stalks are very useful for creating all sorts of different things. Basketry. These days, we wear hemp clothing, and fibers can be spun from it. You mentioned its function as a bioremediator, and obviously,
Bioremediator?
yeah,
Is that
bioremediator.
the same as bioaccumulator?
Yeah, so a bioremediator is essentially like, for example, like a sunflower you'd plant because it's used as a bioremediator because it's a bioaccumulator. So a sunflower can uptake heavy metals, things from soil. I'm not sure which specific uses the cannabis plant is used for in terms of um, bioremediation, but it doesn't surprise me that it is used. I didn't know that. But yeah, my perspective on cannabis really began to shift. It was like, if this plant was part of human society for so long, how odd that it hasn't been in modern times. In recent culture, there's been this prohibition that's lasted much longer than the brief prohibition that we had on alcohol. And we're kind of coming out of that age now. We're coming into an age where it'll be unscheduled. It's legal in some form now in all but 3 states in the country. Um, we're coming out of it, and so as we come out of it, part of what 420 ppm was all about was, can we come out, can we reintroduce this plant to society in a way that is healthy and that honors this plant and its sacred place that it clearly has held in human history for a very long time.
Yes. Yeah. Um, it's super important for us to remember. And I say that not just like on an individual timeline, but on a societal and generational timeline for us to come back and remember how we use this plant and why it's an ally for us. And I think the climate portion and the sustainability portion is a really interesting crux for me because this is such a tool for us, and it can so clearly. So we have a plant that if it's used right, not only are you going to get a better medicine, a better high, a better experience, but it can actually clean the soil. It can help heal the earth. Or if you grow it incorrectly, it's going to help, it's going to continue to push us into this energy of destruction, pollution, us thinking that we are not one with the planet. And it's so interesting to me because, like you said at the beginning, which there's actually we had a study on this. We found a study that when people consume cannabis, they happen to be they end up being more compassionate towards the environment, I believe was the wording that they used.
Yeah,
Um,
I want to say it was like there was a higher degree of nature relatedness and a higher probability of of that demographic of people engaging in pro environmental behavior.
yeah,
I think, yeah, and that's for me too, like a really strong motivator um, to destigmatize the plant, because if we have, there's 380 million people in this country, and some, I think 55 plus million people are report, being regular users. That's a significant portion of the population, and yet it's one of these things that like is still stigmatized and taboo to talk about. And so if it can be this really effective tool, like, we should talk about it. We should talk about what our relationship with it looks like, because what it's looking like here in California in 2025 is like, 100 milligram THC drinks that you can pop and just blast off, and like that's not what this plant is all about. Um, so for me, as someone who is, I think the position I speak from, both as a prior military officer, but not just prior military, but like I was in the drug war. Like, this plant was one of the uh, targets of our operations, um, and for me having that background, but being involved in climate not just the science of climate change, but how do we shift society? How do we steer society toward being more planet positive in our systems? Like, how do we achieve systems change where we can preserve the global commons for generations to come? Not talking about this plant and its potential benefits and uses is, I think it's actively harmful, and it's not utilizing a tool that's potentially there for us. So I feel duty bound. I feel a sense of obligation to use my background and experience and what I know to be true for me, about the plant and its benefits. Again, I think it's one of those things where it all depends on your relationship with it, if it's going to be beneficial for you or not. But I think that starts right. That benefit starts with how you, for example, cultivate it, how you harvest it, how you consume it. Do you do so with intentionality, or are you going to the dispensary and buying the highest THC with no regard for where it was grown, how it was grown, and um, perhaps the people and the ecosystems impacted by that choice. And so yeah, shortly after you showed me that new rituals deck, I went and wrote an essay that I just published on my own website called Cannabis and Justice. That was sort of my like, it was like my coming out, I guess. It was my coming out as like,
I remember
um,
you had me proofread it, which I was honored because I'm terrible at grammar. But
that's right, that's right.
yeah, just to see and be witness of part of that journey of you being an active military officer in the war on drugs, transitioning to being so vocal and open about this, and truly I could feel it in your heart, like you knew how important this was.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like it felt so deeply unfair to me. Like, I remember living in New York City and jaywalking pretty much anytime I felt like it, you know? And I would look at some people not jaywalking and kind of realizing that maybe this person, if they were to jaywalk, like that would be grounds for that person to get, stopped and questioned by authorities or something. And I could spark up a J and walk through East Village, like, pretty much no problem. A lot of because of the way I look as like a white man walking through New York City is essentially, um, this is a jungle that was made for me as a white man doing that, and it didn't feel fair to me that I could just behave in this like free and open way, enjoying this plant that at that time in New York was not yet legal. I don't know what it's like there now if people are just walking through East Village smoking J's now, but yeah, they are good. But
Every
yeah,
corner still.
I felt this deep sense of injustice that I was able to do this to enjoy the benefits of this plant and others couldn't. And so it felt incumbent on me to speak openly about, the positive benefits. I think acknowledging the ways that my relationship can be imbalanced with it as well at times. Right, it's something that I have to, like anything else that a relationship that you manage, make sure that it's actively good for you. But yeah, that essay was more or less my like, here's what I find that is useful for this plant with me. Here's why I think we all ought to talk about it and the benefit it can have for the world. And even something as little as just, if you have an open conversation with someone who enjoys cannabis and letting them know that, like, hey, there's this like little black and white yin yang looking label that you can find at your dispensary on the jar. It says Sun+Earth Certified, and they've done the work for you. They're letting you know that by choosing that one, you are making a choice that is positive for you and for the planet and all beings.
Yeah. And also, unfortunately, Sun and Earth is most popular in California. I know that there's Sun and Earth certified farms around the country, but it is mostly in California. I don't want to discredit, because there are people growing this in really conscious ways outside of the Sun and Earth network as well. But unfortunately, then it becomes the responsibility is on the consumer then to go do the research, because not everything on the shelves, actually, majority of the stuff on the shelves isn't grown consciously. Unfortunately, probably has heavy metals and pesticides in it. Um, so it's not great, but I think the trend is going to get better. We've seen the trend of like there's organic is now everywhere. I think we're becoming much more aware of a society of what we're putting in our bodies, and I'm hoping that just that whole foods trend will make its way to cannabis as well, because it's really important.
Yeah, and I think it will. Um, I do think that it will eventually, and it's like you said, it's Sun Earth. If you're in another state, it isn't necessarily there for you as a certification process. But yeah, it's one of those things where, all right, well, know your farmer then. Like try to find someone who's growing it, or if you can grow it yourself, grow it
Grow your
yourself.
own.
Yeah, but if you can go through the process of trying to get yourself as close to the source as possible, right? If you can do that, if you can do that with your food, if you can do that with with anything really in your life, bring that supply chain closer to yourself. You will create those relationships, right, with a local, like a local farmer, or and you get all those benefits.
Yeah. I think that interconnectedness is a big part of um, this concept that I like to weave into every episode, because it is woven into every episode inherently, but because it's this plant's purpose on this planet, I believe, is to help feminize consciousness. But a part of a more feminine approach to life is more interconnected life. Is yeah, more community driven, more touch points.
And we're seeing a pretty hard pivot away, I would say, right now um, toward that feminization that I think is so important, for us societally to get to a place where we can live more in harmony with and within the natural boundaries of the planet. Um, the feminizing of consciousness, I think the connotation of it in the current zeitgeist is, you're looking at the rise of autocrats, particularly like male autocrats around the world. Here in this country, we're seeing that happen. We're seeing the rise of a lot of these male figures that are really there are some trends right now that are shifting away, I think, um, from from the sort of like the we have to edit out this pause, but we're seeing a shift away toward the feminizing consciousness. And it's like what am I trying to say here?
Close, I can tell.
It's close. It's right there.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, we're definitely shifting into it's like at the same time there's trends like with the current administration and a lot of things that's going on, like you're seeing like the rise of the autocrats and all of that definitely feels much more of this like toxic masculinity. It's almost like this toxic masculinity like bubbling up to the surface. I also then, on one hand, see a beautiful feminizing of consciousness coming over people with the rise of spirituality, and mindfulness becoming a part of just like the regular zeitgeist now. People are being, I think there's a new interest, as there is every other couple of generations, I think, in more like Eastern philosophies. Yoga is so popular. We're seeing plant medicine and psychedelics come to the mainstream in a way that we've never seen before. But I absolutely hear what you're saying in terms of um, there are some really big forces at hand. Like these, it's not just it's yeah. There's some like it's like a scary energy a little bit.
yeah, it's definitely a scary energy, and I guess to bring, I guess, so like where we were at 3 years ago with 420 ppm, right? We had just reached four.
Yeah, where are we now? I think that's a great thing to come back to.
Yeah, so we were at 420 parts per million that year. That year it reached 421 parts per million before dropping back down. So the way the carbon concentration works is it'll go up, you know, 5 or 7 ppm in a year, and then when all the trees lose their leaves, right, the planet kind of breathes in, breathes out with carbon. So as the trees leaf out in the summertime, carbon dioxide is uptaken into trees and plants, soil, across the world, across the northern hemisphere, and in the northern hemisphere summer, where there's more of the land mass of the planet. And then when the trees lose their leaves in the fall, there's that kind of exhale, and then the carbon atmospheric carbon rises. So we're now at 428 parts per million, and yeah, and the rate at which that accumulation is happening is
until the industrial revolution, basically until the 1900s, we were at 280, right?
yeah. So we've
So if
basically
you look at the graph, if anyone who's looking at who's watching this on video right now, the graph goes like and maybe I'll even put it on here.
yeah. If I mean just back of the envelope math, from 280 to 428 is a more than 50% increase in atmospheric carbon since the industrial
Yeah.
era.
And we're just going up.
Yeah, and that's
So
and that rate, the rate is accelerating, which is important.
ugh.
Yeah, it's not linear. So
Yeah, so what's going on?
yeah, so I mean, like you said, there are some dark forces at play occurring globally, and and this is something I wrote about while I was in grad school, which is if all these countries are actually taking their Paris Accord commitment seriously, and we are all going to work together to transition away from fossil fuels and stabilize the Earth's climate, why is defense spending rising every year amongst all of the major world powers? And so we're kind of seeing, and so I was always a bit skeptical that that the countries of the world were going to meet their obligations, that we're going to meet their commitments. And what we're seeing right now is a lot of countries around the world rearming. European countries are rearming. They know that they can't rely on the U.S. for security anymore. The U.S. is ramping up its military capabilities. China has been for a long time. We're seeing countries around the world investing in military buildup, which um, the industry that will drive, and I think more importantly, the trend away from cooperating globally toward these like kind of more lofty ideals and goals, like meeting the climate crisis. Humans are notoriously bad at addressing long-term threats. We're very good at addressing the near-term threat, right? Like the lion in the grass, the enemy at the gate. We're good at dealing with those threats, and that's what's happening now. The more immediate threats, global security, are at the forefront. Atmospheric carbon is increasing. It's accelerating. March 2025, which we just finished this past month, was the hottest March on record. Pretty much the case every month that we have nowadays, right? Every summer is the hottest one as a global average. Every winter is the warmest. The number of freezing days we have here are very few. It's a pretty, I would say, bleak moment in terms of feeling hopeful that we are going to solve this challenge in a timely way where we can stave off some of the worst impacts of warming. And and so this is sort of where that role that I see for cannabis as something that kind of slows us all down, makes us introspect a bit more, makes us feel maybe a bit more empathy for someone that we don't know. I distinctly remember shortly after I left the military, I was in grad school and I was riding the subway back from Morningside Heights to my apartment in Queens. And I had just had a toke and I'm in the subway car. And I remember thinking to myself, I love every single person in this car. And I would jump in front of a bullet for any one of them if someone came in this train car right now. And I think cultivating empathy, right, is like that's one of the keys for us to solve these big challenges facing us. And cannabis, I know for me, does that. It cultivates empathy for myself and for others, among a variety of other things that it does, right? I mean, I love it's no surprise that chemotherapy patients get prescribed cannabis because they lose their appetite when they're on chemotherapy, right? Like the appetite that it brings you, the
I'm laughing because you are like a munchies king. The
munchies,
ice cream. The
munchies king, absolutely. I I enjoy the process of things that I'm doing more. Cannabis is an aphrodisiac for me. I enjoy running in the mountains on it. I think that cannabis as a tool right now, if we have it, we should use it. We should talk about it. We should be introducing people to it. If I think if like some of the world leaders that are at loggerheads right now could just like sit down with the J and talk things through, they might get somewhere positive,
Yes. Yes.
right?
Just, yeah. Can we just get some weed up on Capitol Hill, please? Oh
Man,
man. Yeah. Yeah. I know we're almost at time, and you just shared so beautifully how what it sounds like the softening that cannabis has brought into your life, the empathy, the interconnectedness, the connected back to nature. So I would love to hear how you see cannabis feminizing consciousness on a global scale, and how you think it can improve the lives of the planet in general.
yeah. So I think like maybe a working definition of what it means to feminize consciousness. Um, and Tina Gordon puts it so beautifully, and she said it so beautifully on our panel. Um, but I think to feminize your consciousness, I don't want that to be understood by, especially by perhaps men who are who have some in fear around being perceived as being effeminate, right?
Mm.
Um, but to feminize your consciousness is, um, in a sort of paradoxical way, a the most masculine sort of transformation I think that you can undergo as a man. It's the act of care. It's the act of service. It's the act of cultivating, and that's not just like cultivating a plant in the ground, but cultivating community, family. Um, and I think that the consciousness of care is to kind of like, if I could distill and crystallize for me what Tia means when she says that the feminizing of consciousness is, it is not to become some like wussy man, if that's what the average male cannabis consumer is worried might happen to them if they smoke cannabis. No, it is the act of becoming aware of your responsibility as a man to care for mother, right? Not just your mother, or not just the mother of your kids, but for mother, for the place that we inhabit, for our environment. It's for earth care. It's this idea that your role as a man, as a provider, as a protector is to is to preserve this place so that it can continue to be to it continue to harbor life into the future, and not just for you in this lifetime to consume and enjoy and to be. I believe that my role as a man, and the role of the masculine, what we're being called to do right now, is to tap into that care and that responsibility. And so that's where I think like cannabis can be that tool and turn that key. It turned that key for me. It turns the key in my heart for caring. And so I think that that's where it can really be a tool, especially when you consider like, um, the reason why the planet, why society is in the predicament that it's in. um, it hasn't really been like female leaders that have gotten to this place. It's been a lot of guys who look like me, who have conquered and plundered and extracted. And so there's this historical responsibility, especially as an American. This country has the largest historical carbon footprint of any culture in human history, as a collective, and certainly per capita. Per capita, it's pretty gross, the level of consumption that we have, um, indulged in as a culture. And so for us as a culture, as a nation, to have voted in the administration that we did, and for the direction of them to be going, is, in my opinion, the most egregious abdication of responsibility of and most perhaps selfish act to walk away from the countries of the world, to not lead the effort to remedy what our culture, what capitalism has perpetrated on the planet, to walk away from that at this moment when that leadership is needed most. It's like, where are the men in this room? Where are the men who see and understand this role that we have to play right now? It's not to
Yeah.
it's not to become like, some like sissy culture. It's to become a culture of men who respect the feminine, who hold up the feminine. I'm what I would call a gynocrat. I believe in leadership by women, that leadership by women is crucial. The international Dublin principles around water that were formed in 1991 list in there's only 4 principles, maybe 5. One of those 4 or 5 principles is that women must be involved in water governance in every water basin across the planet. That is because water is life, and women respect life. And so women need to be not necessarily in charge, but at the very least at the table in governing water basins worldwide. And so to bring that all the way around, I believe that this plant as a turnkey into yourself, into your heart, into your responsibility as a man, that is the feminization of consciousness. It's a consciousness of remembering your responsibility.
Mother, what a beautiful message to share on Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day.
Yeah.
Every day is Earth Day. That was really beautiful, Peter. I think that's a great place to close this. I have so much gratitude for you in so many different dimensions, as a friend, as a co-collaborator, and just as someone who gets it. Like you understand the frequency and what I'm doing here on this podcast. I mean, you've been such a big part of my journey to get here. And I'm so grateful for the work you do. You're such a big part of your community. Like, you really are a beautiful example of a masculine pillar of your community, and you're able to uphold that and stand in your masculine and also be so balanced in your feminine. I mean, you are a gladiator running 100-mile freaking ultra marathon races. And then also like rescuing small birds from trees. So thank you for being a great example of and practicing what you preach. And thank you for slowly chipping away at the stigmas with me. We're getting there. And
yeah, thank you, Lexi.
that's my gratitude.
Thank you so much for all the guys out there listening. Caring is cool.
Caring is cool.
Let's
Using cannabis consciously can be cool. So yeah, let's continue to care for the environment and care for each other. And care what you put in your bodies. Start asking your budtenders questions and making sure you're putting the highest frequency, utmost, best crafted cannabis in your body for your sake and for the planet's.
for plant and planet.
Don't forget to subscribe to support this plant-powered exploration. And if you have any questions, are curious, or have ideas for collaborations, give me a follow on Instagram at HigherLexi. I also want to remind you that we're not making any medical recommendations or claims on this podcast. And if you do choose to explore cannabis, please do so mindfully. And until next time, keep the vibe high, friends.